Okay. So, yes, we have a first question here.
I've got one comment and then one question. I thank you, first of all, thank you very much for this very rich and detailed analysis. And I absolutely agree that Moore's Tower works have to be read within this project of making him appear a true martyr within the martyrdom controversy. And I would just like to reinforce this, and that also that the printed layout of the Marian publications was used for that purpose. If we look at Tottle's 1553 Dialogue of Comfort, that agenda is also very much prominent. He uses this woodcut which shows us the Ovidian scene from the Metamorphoses about Pyramus and Thisbe, which is about the mulberry tree. It explains sort of the progeny or the prehistory of the genesis of the mulberry tree. It's about, of course, somebody who dies a violent death, but there's also this more subtle reference to Moor, because mulberry tree in Latin is morus, and that was used in the emblematic tradition as a symbol of wisdom, because Materiality uses this because the mulberry tree shoots a bit, blossoms a bit later than the almond tree, so the almond blossoms sometimes get killed by the first frost, and that's why it stands for rashness and so forth, whereas the mulberry tree stands for wisdom. So I think even this title page border was an implicit message about Moore the martyr, because in the martyrology tradition, also in the early chronicles, he's very much referred to as a fool. Later in the Elizabethan tradition as well, in the book of Tanzania and so forth. So I think this was an implicit message about Moore as a true martyr, about the wisdom of his action, of his decision to resist. And I think it's something that can even be seen in the argument of the Dialogue of Comfort itself, where Moore has this long extended passage about suicide, as kind of, because we have this fictional setting of the threat of the Turks, which can also be allegorically read as an allegory for, of course, the threat that Moore found himself in. And he has this long digression, or it appears to be a digression, where the speaker, Anthony, argues why suicide would be a wise course to take. And the pseudo-martyrs in this debate were very often referred to as suicides. So I think the Dialogue of Comfort can very much be seen within this agenda of trying to promote Moore as a true martyr who acted deliberately, whereas the Marian martyrs could be seen as kind of rashly offering themselves up to death in their more pseudo-martyrs.
Oh no, that's great. I feel this is relatively early-ish stages for this chapter in my thesis, and the 1553 Dialogue of Comfort is something that I was planning to try and go and relate to what I've argued with the work. So that's fantastic. Thank you for those indications. That was great.
And the question I was going to make is a very brief one. It's been argued, I think, by John King that the fact that Moore's Dialogue Concerning Heresies was printed in folio format by John Raskell was actually a kind of strategic failure, because it made the book so expensive that it didn't become available to a large readership. Oh. So would you see the fact that William Raskell presented this huge folio, would you see this as a strategic error in a way that made his publicity campaign less successful?
I don't think you could print this in any other format. I mean, it's so vast that if you were going to have the complete English works of Moore, I think you have to have them in folio. Therefore, I guess that there may be a fundamental problem in terms of what he wants to achieve, and the success of that achievement may be counter. I don't know. I've always wondered exactly who would be buying these texts. because they must be expensive. Again, I haven't found a cost, I haven't found a price for any of them. But even with this kind of condensation of the text to try and make it as economical in terms of its use of paper as possible, it's still going to be very expensive relatively to smaller texts that are around. I suppose they could have, Tottle and Rastle and Tottle could have had a sort of serialisation of more and had something regularly coming out in a smaller format. But they definitely want, there's a real sense from Rastle that he definitely wants to unite these works in one place, and I think practically it seems that the only way he was going to do that was to have something this vast. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes.
Thank you for really fascinating presentation. And I'm glad you spoke a bit about Thomas Painel and his role in compiling the index, because when in the compilation, in the printing of the Suffocation of Souls, the printer's copy survives, and it turns out that Painel's index was made up, for the Suffocation, was made up entirely of the marginal side notes in the second 1529 edition. So you may have been a very careful reader of other texts, but at least in that one text, and possibly in others, we compiled this index from the side notes. And it might be an interesting index into work in his own reading more, to see what aspects, what topics in the other works might have interested him.
Yeah. Yeah, Painel's a really fascinating figure he's been the person during the course of my PhD who continually crops up, but I haven't had a chance to pin down properly. And this has been the moment where I've vaguely managed to pin him down. And I think I really need to pursue him further. He's very important, not only for this, but generally within Mary England with translations and playing important parts in relation to Mary herself. So yeah, I'll pursue his kind of indexing. I think it'd be interesting to see him as a reader and then seeing how he then compiles his index as a reader of More's works generally. I think that would be fascinating. And again, it's an area that I plan to go away and do more work on. So thank you for the suggestion.
Just a quick question about the structure of the volume. I really enjoyed your paper, and I think for the first time you've sort of shown that this, in some ways, this has to be a big book. This can't just be sort of serial parts. This has to be a folio, because could we see the works almost as a sort of species of life writing? As to say, it's the biographical narrative, which, you know, if you're thinking of martyrology, almost a sort of form of hagiography, almost as a form of biography here. I wonder whether we can see that the works is almost doing a similar sort of work to Roper's volume.
Yeah, and I think the inclusion of the early works, the youthful works of More, kind of definitely back that whole idea up. And the fact that they're trying to compress this to try and be presumably as cheap as possible, the fact they then feel they have to go back in and add leaves and pages runs counter to that. But I think it emphasises the importance they felt in having these early works, because it then kind of bookends More from a youth right through to his death. So yeah, definitely it's very, in terms of its structure, biographical, I guess.
I know it was slightly anachronistic.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely, I think so. And the addition of these early works would attest to that, I think.
Yes.
Well, this sort of goes back to the first question. It might be sort of simplistic, but I mean, do we have numbers on how many copies were printed, circulation, and of the extant copies, are there any which have marginalia which might help us understand how it was read, how it was understood? So
in terms of numbers of how many were produced and their circulation, that's consistently the $1 million question for all the texts I've been looking at. A fairly good starting point / indication, which you have to be careful in doing, is looking at the extant copies, and there are a large number of extant copies of this, which you could then argue suggests that it was produced in fairly large numbers. Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, the Cambridge University Library has 3, and then there are far more around. I'm specifically at the moment looking at the Cambridge ones, and there are lots in Cambridge, and then in England, and then in America. So I don't know exactly how many, but a lot. And marginalia, again, I've only looked at the 3 university library copies, which have been disappointingly unmarginalialized. I found one name in the front of he's Richard Points, who's a member of a notable Catholic gentry family, and I'm going to pursue him further. Even the SYN class mark, which is supposedly the annotated texts in the Cambridge University Library, that version has pretty much no marginalia. It's just very occasional underlinings. So yeah, so far it's been disappointing, but I hope to uncover some potential gems further afield. So yeah, sorry, I feel like I haven't really answered your question very well.
You're talking of the 1557 editions. There
Yeah.
are 3 copies in Cambridge around?
In the university library there are.
Oh, you're very fortunate. Yes.
Yeah.
We were shown one copy with the gloves and everything in Washington. One particular and the only one library.
They've definitely
So
got
you must be
3.
very, very.
Yeah, it's great. We're really lucky, and they just give them to me. They ask me not to carry them over all 3 together because they're quite large, and I think I might drop them. But apart from that, they just say off you go. So yeah.
Do you know if there are any copies left in the libraries of the previous Catholic seminars in France, like Saint-Omer or Douai?
I don't know off the top
You
of my
don't
head.
know?
No,
You don't know.
I can
No.
maybe they.
I might have a
Yeah.
look, because we have a big conference in June about this miraculous discovery of a Shakespeare first folio in Saint-Omer. It's another another question. I had two very small questions, because I'm not a more specialist at all. I was wondering about the text of the Utopia in the works. Are they're of course they've used the translation into English, or do we have
In
the
the
Latin
1557.
and English?
In the 1557 work,
Yeah,
Utopia isn't in there, which is always I find quite interesting in terms
Yeah.
of, because he does I mean, you have Bassett's translation, so of the De Tristitia. So then I always wonder why they didn't put a translation in, because there are translations. So I don't know why they didn't put a translation of Utopia in.
They were late in English. They were very late. They were first in French and in German.
Yeah.
Before they came into English.
You said
But
50.
Utopia doesn't make a matter.
No, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
No.
That's I think because I was like, oh, I think I might go away and explore this, but then the fundamental thing is, well, it's not creating more as a martyr in this kind of biographical sense.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, the first translation was in 1551.
Yeah.
The Robinson.
I see, yes.
But it would fit your thesis that
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
the focus was on more the martyr.
Yeah.
Because in the English works, they provide English translations of Latin works.
Latin,
so
yeah, yes, what I said.
Utopia could fit into that, but it doesn't.
It's not. Ah,
Um,
interesting. Yes. How about the play? Well, unless you consider it as a history of Ricardius Tertius, Richard III, which is a play after all, and folio is not meant to, as you said, or Russell said, for trivial matters such as plays. So
It's not a play.
no.
it's not a play; it's a history.
It's
It's
yeah.
a history. Yeah, yeah.
It is in it.
Yeah,
It's
it
in
is.
it,
It's,
yeah, as a
it's-
history. Yeah.
Obviously, it denounces all evils.
It's the second work after the life of Pico.
Yes, and speaking of Shakespeare and the illustration, the woodcut you mentioned in your commentary, I thought it's extremely interesting, because the reference to Pyramus and Thisbe and Moore, with all the puns on name, originated by Erasmus and Commun Moria and so on. The Moor, Moor, Mur, which is Mulberry in French, Mur for wall, all this punning on Moore's name. Suggests that Shakespeare probably had a copy or saw a copy of this folio of the works of Thomas More, because in 1590-91, I mean, you know this much better than I do, in Sir Thomas More, he wrote part, I mean, he collaborated, you see, to the writing of the play. And Midsummer Dream is 1593, 1594, right?
Yeah,
So-
Richard Wilson makes the point in Institute Shakespeare
Who?
that he probably was aware of the punning of
Richard.
Mulberry. Richard Wilson.
Oh, yeah, Richard Wilson and Patricia Parker, in
Yeah.
the first place, wrote many articles about this point. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, you're free now. Maybe come back at the end for more questions. Thank you very much.